Morning, everybody. So as I mentioned last week, we're not going to have a quiz this week, just mostly in the interest of time. I do want to start class by looking at assignment 2, which is now on Blackboard. There are actually 2 versions of assignment 2. So should be available in the assignments tab. So there's 2 separate documents. I'm going to go through each one because you have a choice of building one project or the other. The primary difference between the 2 is the first project, which I'll go through first, option A. This project is easier. You're free to choose option A, but if you choose option A, the maximum grade is an 80%. Okay? You can't get any more than 80 if you do this project. Okay? Option B is more complex and the scale will go up to 100%. You're free to choose whichever one. So I would suggest you maybe think about how's your overall grade in the course? How do you feel your understanding level is? If you feel really confident with what we've done, then tackle option B. Okay, you can get a higher grade, you'll probably learn more from it. If the course has been pretty challenging for you so far, then you may want to do project A instead. So I'll go over each one. Okay. In either case, the grade's 30% of your mark, and it's going to be due in 3 parts. So rather than you being able to leave the whole thing to the end, you can't. You have to submit stuff each of the next 3 weeks. So pardon? So option A is basically you're going to take the work you did in assignment 1 and you're going to add additional functionality onto those 3 pages you built for assignment 1. So for next week, what you'll have to do is send me the link to your same, you can use the same repository you used for assignment 1. You don't have to create a new one. And over the next week, by next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, I want to see that you've worked and made at least 4 new commits to your GitHub repository. Okay? Those have to be done on at least 2 separate days. And by that, I don't mean like 11:58 and 11:59 p.m. and then 12 o'clock and 12:01 a.m. Doesn't count. Okay. So you're going to, you also, I noticed several people are still just doing the direct upload to GitHub. That's not going to be acceptable because when you upload, when you just drag and drop your files, the commit message always is add files by upload. So it doesn't actually describe what work you did. So you'll need to use the git commands. They're on Blackboard and your command prompt and descriptively name each commit. You also have to make sure you have a README file in your repository, and you should include the link to your site on AWS. So to submit for next week, just give me the Git repository link and give me the AWS link on Blackboard. So basically the same 2 things I asked for assignment 1, just resubmit those same links for next week. For part 2, again, I just want to see 4 more commits and I'll show you the requirements. Again, over 2 more dates, so you're just going to give me the same links 1 more time. Thank you. And same for part 3. So you're submitting the same 2 links each time. Okay, but the work you have to do for each part is obviously going to be different. You have to submit an independent assignment. You cannot give me the same work as somebody else with the words changed. That includes my own work that I've posted on GitHub. Okay. If your work looks suspect or I have questions about it, then we'll have a code review meeting, and I would expect that anything that's in your project are things that you can explain. Okay, if you can't explain it, that's going to suggest to me it's not your work, someone else did it, and you got it from somebody else, and I'm not going to grade it in that case. I've already just went through this about 3 times over the past week, where students gave me work that was very different from what I taught in class, and we had code review meetings. They couldn't tell me where the work came from, and there was also code in there that they couldn't explain. So they got 0s, and I got to spend my time writing up academic misconduct forms, which is a great use of my time, which I love doing. Puts me in a great mood. So let's not do that. And lastly, after you submit the final assignment, which is on April the 1st, You can't make any more changes to your Git repository afterwards. Once I mark it, you want to do more work on it, by all means. But don't make any changes after that final submission date, please. So if you're doing assignment A, here's what you have to add. First thing is add a home page. Right now for assignment 1, you have 3 pages. You have a form, a save page, and a page that shows your data in an HTML table. So create a home page, kind of like we've done in class, that explains the purpose of your site. Add a shared header, like we did in class last week. There should be a navigation bar with links to the different pages on the site. And then on the page you built for assignment 1 that has your HTML table with a list of data, you're going to add edit and delete functionality to it, kind of like you did, we did with our music library, and you did for lab 2. So that's what you need to submit for next week if you're doing this assignment. Basically, create a home page, a header, and edit and delete on top of assignment 1. Okay, these are all things that we've done either in lab or in class. For part 2, you'll have to set up user registration, login, and log out, and also make some changes to the header. So when a user is anonymous, the header has register and login links. When a user logs in, those links are hidden, and the nav bar instead shows their username and shows a logout button. We're going to do that in class today with our music library. And then you'll also need to make all of the pages for creating, editing, updating, and deleting private. So if the user is anonymous, they can't access them. Somebody would have to be logged in order to change any data in the site. They can see the data if they're anonymous, but they can't make any changes to it. And again, that's what we're going to do today in class. So at the end of today's class, you should have everything you need to know to do both parts 1 and part 2. For the last part, you'll also have to add the ability that when we edit a record, we can also upload an image alongside it. And we'll do file uploads in next week's lesson. Okay, so this part is not due until April 1st, so you'll have time to implement this. You'll also have to implement your CSS. How many of you, just by a show of hands, probably at least half of you, how many of you are in Jessica's class COMP1054? Okay, so I think what we're going to do, Jess and I are going to meet on Monday, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to combine my assignment 2 with her major assignment. So the CSS requirements that Jess wants you to do, rather than you doing them in a separate application, she's going to give you the option to do that work and integrate it with your PHP site. So you'll have one integrated whole, and I'll mark the PHP component, Jessica will mark the UX components. So we've kind of agreed to that. We're going to meet on Monday to flesh out sort of some of those requirements. I know for those of you who are in computer programmer, you're not in that course, don't worry about it. You can just do your own thing for the CSS as I've listed here. You'll also have to implement error handling. We'll look at that probably the beginning of class next week. That won't take us very long to do, maybe only half an hour worth of class time. Just a few simple techniques we put in our sites so that if things go wrong, we're not just showing users error messages. And then again, deploying everything to both to GitHub and to Azure correctly, or GitHub and AWS. So I've sort of color coded the different sections in the marking. So the light gray is part 1, and that's what's due for next week. The medium gray authentication piece is due the week after, and then the darker gray are the things that are due at the end. And there's 4 deployment marks for using GitHub correctly and publishing your work to AWS for each section of the assignments. You have to do this for each part. And up to 2 bonus marks if you add additional PHP functionality, anything we haven't learned in class. If you're inclined to do bonus marks, however, probably this isn't the assignment for you. You may as well do the assignment where you can get more marks. Does anybody have questions about any of the requirements that are in the first assignment? Okay. So the same due dates are going to apply for the second assignment, but the purpose is different. For this one, you have to make a new project. Nothing that we've done previously is going to be really of help to you. So again, the same thing, same dates. So you'll just submit. So this one you have to make a new repository for. And you'll just, I guess, sorry, I should take that out. Again, each time, give me the repository link, give me the AWS link so I can try the pages in the browser. So for this one, what you're going to build is your own content management system. A lot of you have used content management systems before, something like WordPress or Joomla or Wix or Weebly. You're going to build your own simple content management system from scratch using PHP and MySQL. I've built a sample of this. So there's a little 5-minute YouTube demo you can watch to get an idea of what the site should look like. So the idea is all of your pages in your site are virtual pages. You're not creating a home page, an about page, a contact page. You're creating records in the database with a page title and page content. So your links will be filled in dynamically in the navigation bar. Okay, so you can see from the video how this is done. So for part one, you have to build the site control panel. Okay, so there's a register, a login. So that has to be set up for next week. For part two, you have to add to the control panel user management. So anybody who signs up, you can see them in there, you can edit or delete their account. That's part two. And part three is the actual content management piece. So through your database in the site control panel, you can create virtual pages and add content, and those pages will show up on the public area of your website. So you can manage the links in the navigation bar, and you can manage the content on each page. And the public website should have a common header, and basically there's only one public page. You just call it index, and the links would look something like this. So every time we pass in a different ID to that page will show a different title and load different content from the database. This is basically what any content management system, something like WordPress, actually does. And then same implementation of CSS and error handling in your content management system. So this assignment's out of 48 as opposed to 38. And again, you can see from the kind of the shading which elements are due when. And 4 deployment marks again for each part, for putting it on GitHub and on AWS. So I won't play through this video. You can go through it. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. So I show you what the site control panel looks like, how you create new virtual pages, and then when I create one in the admin site, what does that look like on the public website, and how would I then modify page content through my site control panel. This is a fair bit more complex and more challenging. You're probably also going to learn a lot more. I've actually had lots of really good feedback on this assignment over the years. A lot of students have said this assignment was, the content management system building one was difficult, but that they learned an awful lot and that it was valuable. So if you're doing well in the course, you may want to take a stab at this. One thing I should warn you, you can't change assignments partway through, however, because the grading is completely separate. So if you do part one in option B and then say, this is too difficult, I now want to go and do option A, the requirements and grades are completely different. So you're basically going to need to decide in the first week which assignment you're doing and stick with that one. You're not going to be able to change partway through because there's no effective way for me to be able to grade it in that case. And you're going to be making a lot more work for yourself in that case.
really easy to me, and they want that challenge. Would that be fair or not?
I'll have to think about it. It also, you're also going to be creating a lot more work for yourself though, because what you did in part one for one assignment, you can't transfer it to the other assignment. So you're going to have to then do 4 parts, basically part 1 over here and part 1, 2, 3 over there. So I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, so what I would suggest is take an honest assessment of how you feel you're doing in the course, and maybe let that guide you as to which assignment option would be better for you. You're not losing marks, but the maximum, if you give me a perfect option A, you'll get an 80. If you give me a perfect option B, you'll get 100. It's really trying to give you some choice and offering a couple of different levels of challenge, because there's a fairly, we have a big class, so people are at sort of different levels of understanding. So I used to only give this assignment out, but what I found was students who were maybe struggling with the concept, some of them were pretty overwhelmed with they never really got the whole idea of the content management system. So I've given them, providing another option that's maybe a little more straightforward in terms of the requirements and how it works. No, this assignment is 30% of your overall grade. Okay, so if you do option B and you do perfect, you'll get 30 marks out of 30. If you do option A and you meet all the requirements and it works perfectly, you'll get 80% of that 30. So you get 24. You get 24 out of 30. So I will leave it up to you. Okay, but I don't think it's fair to grade the 2 assignments equally, because one is significantly more complex than the other one. So do which one you think probably makes the most sense for your own learning. Well,
so does it make sense to say the reason you're giving this option, if I'm already struggling with code and I'm not going to get 90, this helps me to kind of like pass instead of struggling with assignment 2 and getting like.
That's exactly. So the history of this was, for several years, I only gave option B, the more complicated assignment, the content management system. The last time I taught this course, overall, the skill level in the course was very low. And I was concerned about having massive numbers of students not pass the course. And I felt this assignment was just simply going to be too challenging for that group of students. So I only gave them this assignment. So I created this the last time I taught the course. I've updated a little bit, but I basically gave them the easier assignment. This class, we've got a pretty big range, and it's a big class. Like I only had 24 students in that class. This class is much bigger. So I'm giving you the option to do either one. Well, that's what the demo video is for. The demo video, I've built a solution. So I've walked through, I've recorded what it looks like and how you use it. I didn't show you the code, but you can see the end product. So basically with the content management system, there's 2 sides to it, right? There's the administrative side where the site owner manages the site. And then there's the public site that visitors to the site can see. Okay, so there's sort of 2 different interfaces. So I've done a walkthrough of, if I want to make a new page on my site, here's what it looks like in the control panel. And then here's the output that a visitor to the site would see. Okay, but I'm not showing you the code. You'll have to figure that part out. I've already taught you the code, because content management systems, all they do is create, read, update, and delete. it means that the content for your page, rather than being embedded in an HTML file, that content is inserted, created as a record in a database table. And when a user loads that page, which is typically indicated by the ID number, right? So in my database, I'd have a pages table. I have a page ID 2. The page title is about, and the content, there'll be some other field in that record that holds the content that I've added through the form in my admin panel. So when a user clicks this link, I'm going to say, okay, page 2, go and select that page out of the database, print the title inside an H1 tag, and then echo out the body or the page content. So it's really just content management system is just create, read, update, and delete. There's no other code there. Okay. And you may remember, I actually said that on the first day of class. Every web application, that's all they do is create, read, update, and delete from a database. A content management system is no different. Okay. So you should be able to, especially if through the walkthrough, you should be able to figure it out if you're fairly comfortable with create, read, update, and delete. That's all it's actually evaluating. Just asking you to adapt those skills in a bit more of a sophisticated way. So whichever one you choose, part 1 will be due next week on Wednesday. And the idea here is your final assignment is due in week 12. So that way, week 13, 14, you'll tend to have a lot of stuff due in other classes. The big assignment in this class will already be finished. As for what will actually happen with our semester, I don't exactly know. I don't think it will be, if the colleges get closed, I don't think it'll be a college to college. I think decision will probably be a ministry decision that they decide to close all the colleges. If that's the case, we're fortunate that we can just put everything online. I actually have taught this course entirely online. Yeah. Yeah, well, I can just do the whole lesson. You just do it from home. If we have to do an online exam from home, there's lots of different ways we can do that. Yeah, so to do the rest of our course online is no problem. You know, we're not working in a machine shop or a pharmacy lab or something like that. Some of the other areas may have much more of a challenge to port their content to online where people are doing much more hands-on. But fortunately, what we're doing, it lends itself fine to remote work. So if we did get an email this morning from the vice president of academics. And basically, if the college closes, what we've been at, they don't want to extend the semester. So it will be some combination of what can be delivered effectively online, or asking instructors to look at what may be non-essential from their course that could be removed if the semester got shortened, right? Again, less of an issue for us, more of an issue in a program like pharmacy technician, where those students have to go and write an industry certification exam that requires them to know certain things. So the faculty have a lot less leeway to say, well, maybe this would be a nice to cover topic. If we don't get to it, I'm not really compromising what my students are learning. Our last couple of lessons in this course are sort of nice to know topics. If we don't get to them, not the end of the world. The core stuff is create, read, update, and delete, and authentication. And we're going to do authentication today and file uploads next week. The other stuff is stuff I like to cover because you should know it, but not as critical as the stuff we've kind of done up to into today. So we should be fine regardless of what happens. Okay. Okay. So I want to jump into authentication and get as much of this done today as we can, because A, it's hard to predict what the future is going to bring for the class, and B, as I said, after create, read, update, and delete, authentication is the most important subject we have to cover. Not a day goes by that you don't, or a week goes by where we don't hear about some breach, some application breach. It happens to companies big and small, and it's part of our responsibility. If we're building applications, we have to take some proper measures to, no site is perfectly hack-proof, but we have to follow best practices and do what's reasonable to protect our sites. Okay. So I'm going to start up my server. I'll open up our project and load it in the browser so we can have a quick look at our music library as it stands right now. So I'm going to open my site and we'll just load it up. Last week, we built the simple home page. We used the require once function to create a shared header and a shared footer. Yes, it does need a little more design work. Eventually, I want to anchor the footer to the bottom, maybe add some padding here, but I'm going to leave that stuff for today. And I need to remember to connect to my VPN because any interactions with our database aren't going to work, obviously, until I'm connected. So next week, we'll want to deal with this kind of error handling, not so good. It shows my credential here. So we have a working site where we can add, edit, delete. The problem is all this functionality is public, right? I've uploaded this site to AWS. Anybody who finds my site, they could easily, just go on. They could go here and just delete all my data, or they could edit any record and wipe out my valid data, put in junk data. They could add a whole bunch of garbage data. So normally, most websites, we have some sort of level of control about who can change the data and what they're allowed to do. Not in all sites, but most of them, usually anybody who can change data is going to have to, we're going to have to know who they are. So here's what we want to do with our site. This is what I want to have done by the end of class today. On this page, the add, delete links should be invisible. We shouldn't even see these if we're not logged in. And the band names, rather than being printed as links, those should just be printed as plain HTML text, just like the other columns in the table. So this should be like a read-only view. I can see the data, but I can't manipulate it at all. This page, I shouldn't even be able to load unless I'm an authenticated user. I shouldn't get here because this is for adding or editing. So what things are we going to have to do in class today in order to make this work? So we've got this public site where any anonymous user can make whatever changes they want. What will we need to do in order to make it so that only an authenticated user can modify anything? And anonymous users, they can only view the site, but not change anything. Okay, we're going to have to create a login page. Yep. What else are we going to have to do? Yeah, we're going to need to build a table in the database to store the user accounts, for sure. That is probably going to be the first thing we need to do. You're right, Camilo. What else will we have to do? Build a user table, build a login page. What else? Yeah, have a page that validates the login attempts. Building the form isn't enough. We need to check when someone enters a username and password, whether that matches our user table or not. Yep. We'll need a couple of other pages as well. How are we going to get users into the users table? We can build a table, but there aren't going to be any user accounts in it. How through a website will we get users into the users table? Yeah, we're gonna need a register page as well, and a page that will then save those new accounts to the database. So if we have a table, have a sign up page, have a page that will save them, and then have a login form and a page to validate. So we can do all of that. So we're gonna need a new table, 4 new pages. We could do all that. That still isn't gonna change anything here though. What else will we need to do on this page, as well as this one? Yeah, so we're gonna have to check now when these pages load, we need to check, do we have a user, an authenticated user who's logged in, or is this user anonymous? On this page, an authenticated user will see the links, an anonymous user will see a read-only version. What about on this page? This page we want to handle a little differently. So what should happen here when a user is logged in? You're close. Sorry, somebody said over here. If they are logged in, then we'll just show the page. What should we do? What happens when you try to access a page on a website that's private and you're not authenticated? What do you get instead? Yeah, it takes you, usually directs you back to the login screen. So if I, for example, take this URL from Blackboard, I'm signed in here. But if I jump over to Chrome, well, it logged me in because that's not a good example. I'll go to a private window. Go here in private, and it bounces me over to the login screen. So we want to do the same thing on our form, our musician form. If you're not logged in, you can't see the form, you get taken back to the login page. So once we do all of that, yeah, if you need anything, yeah, everything we've done so far, yeah, it's in the repository on GitHub. So you can download it. If you download the repository, make sure you change the database connection, which we made much more efficient last week, if you recall. No, we didn't. We didn't have time to. I apologize. It was on my to-do list. We didn't get there yet. So you'll need to put in your credentials. So step 1 is, as Camilo said, we need a table in the database. So I've actually put a simple script here on Blackboard for you that you can just copy and execute in your database. This will create a users table with 3 fields. A user ID, so an automatically assigned number, a username field, and a password field. So just copy that script. This is in the lesson 9 folder. And connect to your database. Make sure you run the use command first to connect to your database. And then just copy and paste and execute this. It'll build the table for you. Now, there's one kind of unusual thing if you look at the structure of this. It's a fairly standard table, but one of the values I've put in here might seem a little bit unintuitive. What value may be a little bit strange? Okay, Maria, what's odd about the password field? Okay, that's true. That's just because it's an SQL keyword. But there is something. Look at the size of the password field. Okay, it's 255 characters. Does anybody here have a password for anything that's 255 characters long? Okay, well, that's exactly why. Right, okay. Camila, why do we want 255 characters? Okay. You're very close. So if I create an account with the password ABC123, I don't want the plain text version ABC123 stored in the database. I want my password to look something like this instead. I already have some users in my database. Whoops. So you can see the passwords here. I did not type these passwords. They look like a string of random letters and numbers, and Camilo suggested we might want to encrypt the passwords. So an encryption will take a plain text value and convert it into a long string of seemingly unreadable characters. We're going to use a similar technique, but we're not actually going to encrypt. We're going to use a technique called hashing instead. So these are hashed passwords. Does anybody know the difference between hashing and encryption? This will be on next week's quiz, by the way. They're similar, but not exactly the same. Hashing is considered more secure than encrypting, even though the results kind of look the same. So what do you think the difference might be? Ralph? You got it. And what about hashing? Absolutely. So encryption is two-way. So with encryption, you can take plain text and convert it to a string like this. But it also means you can decrypt it back into the original text. Hashing is a one-way algorithm. So once you convert the plain text to a string like this, there's no easy way. Yes, it may be possible to hack, but there's no built-in way to unhash it. Unhashing doesn't exist. Right, so this is why on most sites now, if you forget your password, you have to reset it, because passwords, the best practice is to hash them. There's no way to unhash and show you what your old password was. The only thing you can do is some other process to identify yourself, and then you have to create a new password. So we want to use hashing instead of encryption for the password. Justin? Well, what it does is it uses your password, but it takes that text and applies a hashing algorithm to it. So it converts whatever you typed in to something that looks like this. And there's no mechanism to reverse it, to show you the original value. Yes, that's right. So that's why if you forget it, you have to recreate a new one entirely. There's no way to reverse this back into the original form.
For example, if I have my password ABC, after I have agreement,
okay.
It will save the database.
Right.
After the next again, I will use my regular password.
Yep.
In which say I will have the validation, like it will compare with my database records always.
Yeah, so let's say, let's say your password's on the page that saves your registration. You type in Maria123, all in lowercase, okay? Because it's case sensitive as well. When we save to the user table, we're gonna take Maria123 and hash that password, and it'll create a value like something like this. So on the login screen, you're gonna type Maria123 in lowercase. In order to check, we have to then hash the value on the validation page as well, and then we're comparing that hashed value to this one. And we're saying, are they the same? If they're the same, it means you've put in the same password at login as you did when you signed up. We don't actually know what the password is. We just know it's the same. It also, we'll also check and see what happens. Like what happens if two users create the same password? We'll look and see the hashing algorithm should actually give a unique result each time. So even if we all create an account in the same table and we all use the same password, once it gets hashed, it will be unique. So there's a key, Justin, kind of as you were saying, there's a unique key that the algorithm uses to uniquely identify each one. And that's why we need 255 characters. These are not 255. I think these are 60 characters. But the PHP guide, they change the hashing algorithm regularly because it works for a few years. Then somebody publishes a hack, and then they've got to update it. So the PHP documentation recommends we use 255 characters so that they can allow for stronger and stronger passwords over time as hackers keep breaking the code, and then we've got to redo it. Or new encryption algorithms, new hashing algorithms come out. Okay, so step one is done. We've created our table. Rebecca and Ivan both said we need a register page. We're not going to spend our time hand coding the HTML for the register page. I've just posted it on Blackboard. We're just going to download it. I think by now everybody knows how to create a form. So just copy all of the HTML for the register page, create a new file called register.php, and then just take out all the code that's in there and just paste this in. So we'll all have an identical register. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to make a new PHP file called register. Take out all the HTML that's in here. Paste everything from Blackboard. So it's a fairly simple form. We've got our header at the top and footer at the bottom using the require once function we used last week. And then a general form is going to post to a page called Save Registration. We'll build that one in a minute. And we've got a username field. We're setting the type to email, so people have to give us a properly formatted email address as the username. The only thing that's new here that you've maybe never seen before is I've added this pattern attribute to the password fields. So if you look at that pattern, what do you suppose the password rules are? And I've applied it to both password and confirm password boxes. So what restrictions is this going to place on the passwords? Yep, there has to be at least one lowercase character, so that's this A to Z here. It has to be at least 8 characters. It has to have, it doesn't actually say about symbols. The D is a digit, so it has to be one number. And obviously, if that's lowercase, at least one lowercase, one uppercase. So we can just use this regular expression. So we're not requiring special characters, but we're requiring a digit, a lowercase, an uppercase, and a minimum length of 8. And we have applied that to both boxes. While we're copying and pasting, here's the login form as well. It's almost the same. The only difference is it'll post to a different page. And there's no confirm password on a login, just username and password only. And we don't set up the password rules on the login because that's providing hints to the users what a valid password might be. So again, just copy all the HTML here. And make a new file called login.php. Wipe out the HTML template that's there and paste in your form. So this is an even simpler page. There's absolutely nothing new on this page. Just a standard HTML form with a couple of input boxes, header and footer at the top. One thing to note, anytime we're asking for a password, this attribute is vital. In your input box, you need to add type equals password. So the characters are not visible as the user types. So somebody standing behind them can't see the password value they're entering. That's a really good question, Justin. So yes, there are sites where there's a little like a little eye icon. So if you click it, it will let you see the characters. I've never actually tried that before. I'll have to look into that. One way possibly you could do it, although I'm just thinking, I don't know if with JavaScript you can at runtime change the type attribute of that in the DOM, that when you click it, it may toggle the type from type equals password to type equals text. That may be one way of doing it. I've honestly never tried, but I'll have to look into that. Maybe send me an email to remind me and I'll check that. Okay, so there are two forms. So we've got a validate page. We'll build that a little bit later. And we have a save registration page. We'll need to build that one first because we can't check any logins until we can save new users. So we got to do the registration part first and make sure that's working before we can do the login. Login will happen second. So our next task is we're going to want to make this page. This page is going to be pretty normal, a pretty normal page that just performs a create operation. We want to insert a new record into the database. The only thing that's going to be new on our save registration page is we have to take care of the password. We have to hash the password before we save it. So we're not saving a plain text version. Again, we're not saving, for example, we're not saving Maria123. We're converting Maria123 into XYZ1268, 60 characters worth of whatever PHP will hash that to. And then we'll just do a regular insert, bind our username and password parameters, and execute the insert. So let's go ahead and create a new PHP file with this name. This will be a hidden page, so the user will never actually see this page. This will just save them to the database, and after we save them, we'll take them to the login page. So create a new file called saveregistration.php. Make sure the file name matches exactly so our form is posting to the right URL. I'm going to take out all the HTML on this page because this is PHP code only. There is nothing we're going to show the user on this page. They'll never see this file. We'll get the form inputs. We'll want to validate. We'll want to make sure they filled out all three fields and that they've entered the same password twice. Insert command. This is what's going to happen on this page. So there's really only one line of code here that should be new, which will be the line we're using to hash the password. Everything else is just a standard save operation from a form. Get the form values, connect to the database, set up our insert, put the values in, and execute it. So I'll create 3 variables at the top. I'll create a username variable, a password variable, and a confirm variable. And we'll grab those 3 from our form post. I'll also use my standard variable I use for doing my validation. I'll create a variable called OK, and I'll set it to true. And then in our validation section, if we encounter any errors, we'll change OK from true to false. So we know we don't need to connect to the database and try to insert. If they don't put in a username, we'll show a message and we'll change OK from true to false. Now I already added validation on the form. If I go back to my register page for a minute, right, I've already said it's required. So our PHP validation shouldn't actually get triggered unless a user creates their own page or an HTTP tool to try and post directly to the safe page. So we're going to validate on both the front end and on the server. With our password if it's empty. And then we'll say if our password is not equal to firm, we don't really need to check if confirm is empty. We'll just need to make sure the 2 passwords match and the password isn't empty. Now for our database connection, I planned to do this last week, but we ran out of time. We talked last week when we built our shared header and shared footer. We said one of the other things that we should probably share right in one place and share through the website is the database connection. Because we commonly have to change the connections if we change hosts or our site gets hacked and we have to reset the password. Right now we have our database connection in almost every file. So it would save us a lot of time if we created a separate file for our database connection and put the credentials in there. I had hoped to do it last week. We didn't have time. Since we're at the database connection piece now, I want to do that. If you look at our musicians file, I have my connection here. So what I want to do is, rather than repeat my database connection over and over again, I just want to require a separate file. So we'll build this file in a minute. We'll create a database connection file. We'll just give it a nice short name. We'll call it db.php. And then we'll go and build this file and put our connection in there. I probably don't have time today to replace it in all of our old files, but moving forward, we'll just require the database file rather than typing in a connection over and over again. So it's telling me this file isn't found. It's highlighting in yellow. That's okay. We'll make this file. We'll put our database connection code in there. I'm going to make a new PHP file called db. This will be the last time I type my database connection string. Made you type it for 9 weeks now. Hopefully, if you have some familiarity with it, we can stop typing it. This will be the last time. There is method to my madness. Of course, I don't remember my password, so that I'll copy.
When you require file,
Yes, at runtime, it's all one big file. Right, we did this last week with our headers, right? So here's our home page. Right? There's no HTML, there's no nav bar in here. It's just linked at runtime wherever you require it, because we required our header at the top and footer at the bottom. So in the browser at runtime, first it runs all the code in HTML in the header, then whatever's in the middle, and then so wherever you require the file, that's where the code is used. Sorry, it's the same. The difference between require once and require is semantic. With require once, you can only include that file one time per page. With require, if you had a separate file and you wanted it to be visible or used multiple times, require will allow you to do that. So let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. Let's say we built a separate file that allowed you, a separate page that allowed you to upload a file. So we built that as like its own page, its own, and it showed up like in the side of your page. But you had a page where you wanted to allow the user to upload, let's say, 5 different files. You could include your file upload 5 times if you use require. If you use require once and you tried to put it in 5 times, you'd get an error after the first time saying this file's already been required. It can't be required again if you use require once. For our purposes, we're not going to be requiring the same file multiple times, so it really doesn't matter if we use require or require once. Require once is probably more descriptive of what we're doing, but if I change that to require, it would work just fine. They're shared. They're shared, yes. Okay, so that's a good question. Thank you for raising it, Walt. So we have require and require once, and we have include and include once. Again, for our purposes, we could use any one of these 4. Anybody want to? Yeah, well, Walt, I'll let you take a guess. What do you think the difference in functionality might be between using require and using include? That's a very good guess. It's actually not quite, but that's a good guess. Jeffrey? Right. If you require a file and that file doesn't exist, when you load your page, it'll generate an error saying this required file is not found. If you include a file and it's not found, you get a warning instead, but the rest of your page will still load. So actually, we'll try this, just see. So here, let's say on my home page, I'll call require once. So this file doesn't exist, right? My code editor is saying some header, there's no file. So if I load my home page now, the page dies, right? Require once fails because it's looking for some header which doesn't exist. If I used include instead, right, the rest of the page still loads. It gives me an error, but it doesn't stop the execution of the page. So there's nothing wrong. You could use include if you wanted to, but most of the time when we're including or requiring files, they're pretty important. So getting an error and stopping the page is okay. If you wanted to use include, it wouldn't be wrong. It would still work, but you can see the difference. So include will let the rest of your page still run, if it can, right? It may not be able to, because if you're requiring the database connection and that fails, well, any work with the data down below is going to fail anyway. So which one you use really isn't that important. The differences are fairly minor. So here's my database file. So now in my save page, we can just call require once to use the database. And I guess we should say we should do all this inside of the if statement. So if our OK variable is still equal to true. If we've changed OK to false, we don't have to do anything else. We show the user an error and we stop. So I'm going to move steps 3 through 7 inside of this if block. So I'll create 2 parameters, a username and password parameter. Now for assignment 2, you'll have to include authentication. It's fine that your register and login pages are basically going to be the same as what we do in class. I don't expect you to magically recreate that code in some different form. I imagine your code is basically going to be the same as what we're doing here, and that's okay. So my code editor is complaining a little bit here. Notice it's highlighting my insert in yellow. On the save page we wrote previously, here's my insert. Okay, never mind. I'm just going to ignore that. So we can use our DB variable. So the DB variable is created here in our required file, but then we can still use it below, because these files will work together at runtime when the page is called in the browser. So the variables get shared. So here's our, I'm going to create a new variable called hashed password. And PHP has this very convenient method called password hash. Password hash needs 2 parameters. So the first one is what's the value we're hashing? So that's our password entered by the user, Maria123. The second option is it wants to know what hashing algorithm. So there's different methods we can use for hashing, and we're recommended to use, you can see when I type the word password, there's 4 different hashing algorithms. The recommended one is just the default, the password default. So they're just different processes, different encryption routines that can be applied to that password. We'll just use password default. So now we'll call bind param twice. First, we're going to fill our username parameter from the username variable. Our username is 50 characters. So what variable do we put into our password parameter? Because we actually have 3 different variables in this page for a password. We've got password, we've got confirm, and now we also have hashed password. Which one of these 3 values should we be filling into the password parameter here to go into the database? Yeah, we want to save the hashed value, that long random string. And we need to make sure we're setting that as potentially up to 255 characters. And then we just call the execute method that will run our insert, save the new user to the database with their hashed password. I'm going to leave out the redirect for now, because we need to try this page and see if it works. If our page gets an error but then redirects to the login, we're never going to see the error. So we need to test it out before adding the redirect. So if this page works correctly, we should just get a blank page loading in the browser. And then we can go to our database in MySQL Workbench and look at the users table and see if there's anything new created. So your tables are empty. I was already working with this table in my Friday section, so I have 3 users already, user ID 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to try and create a new user account, and if it works, it should create user ID 6. Okay, this part or this part? Okay, no problem. Thank you for letting me know. If you think you have the code, then load your register page in the browser. Actually, we're going to need to log in. So here's what I want you to do. We should all create the same user account because you're going to need that user account to log in each week. So you don't have to remember the user account. Let's use these credentials. Let's use a nice short username, user@gc.ca, and your password, we'll make it capital T 1234. So that'll follow our strong password rules. So this way next week, if you try to log into your site and you think, oh crap, I can't remember the login, well, we'll just yell at you what the login is because everybody will have the same user account in their database. So I'm going to try mine out. Yes, we should. Yes, we'll do that if we have time. We can require the db.php in all the places we have our connection in all our old files. I wanted to do that last week and just we ran out of time. I'll use user@gc.ca. And you can see the strong password, that pattern is working if I only put in 3 characters. HTML5 validation complains. Now, right now, the form isn't checking that the passwords are the same. Our PHP page is checking. If we have time, we can write a little JavaScript that will also check in the form. Yes, on the key press. So as you're typing, if the passwords don't match, there'll be a red message here. And as soon as they match, it'll disappear. So we can use JavaScript. It'll be a fairly simple script we can write. And we can call on key press. If we have time, remind me and we'll do that because I have the script. So I'll try and sign up here. Okay, so a blank screen is encouraging. That's the proper result. So now I'll go to my database and I'll run a select star from users query. So now I have a user 6 with this username, and my password has been hashed. Now I know it's hard for you to see these values. But if you look in your table, if you were able to register successfully and you entered the same password as me, so the algorithm gives me exactly 60 characters. Now, if you entered the same password as me and look at your hash value, is your hash value the same or different than mine? Yep. So even if you've entered this same password, if you're able to register successfully and look in your database, that password value should be different, even though we've created the same password. The hashing will make it unique. It uses a unique key for every instance.
Every time it will create a new password.
Yeah, so what I'm gonna do, I'll create a second user with the same password in the form, and then we can look in the table, but the hash value should be different. Okay, so I've got user, I'll go back, I'll create user 1. I'll put in the exact same password again. So here's the second password for my second account. They're both 60 characters, but it will uniquely generate the hash value every time. So even if multiple people type the same password in the register field, it gets saved to the database uniquely, which is good, right? If it hashed it the same way every time, it would be easier for somebody to try to hack and identify. So it does use, there is a unique key is part of the algorithm. That's a good question. There's a few ways we could protect against a duplicate username. One thing we could do is in the database end, on the username field, we could set that it has to be unique. So therefore, if we tried to insert a record with a username that was already existing, the database would generate an error. So that's one thing we could do. The other thing we could do, which if we have time we can implement here, is before we do this code, we could write a select query to check if there is already a user with this username in the database. And if there is, we would then show an error saying username already exists. We probably should add that to this. If we have time, we'll add that because we do not want duplicate usernames. We don't want to hash it, however, because one of the other things we want to do once users sign in, I'll put the code back, just give me 1 sec. Once a user signs in, we want to show their username in the navigation bar. If we hash it, we can't do that because there's no way to convert it out of the hashed version back to the plain text. So generally, we only hash the passwords. We probably should be checking on this page that we're not doing an insert, so we should write a query first. And again, if we have time, we'll implement that today, if we can. Okay, it's 12:15. You guys, we've done a lot of work today. Let's take a break here. I'll upload everything we've done to Git and add the video to the playlist. So if there's anything you need to catch up on, you have a bit of time to do that.